afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We're just giving everyone a moment to come in from the waiting room.
Hello, everyone.
Lovely to see so many of you. Brilliant. So, can I ask everyone just to put themselves on mute if they're not, please, just for any background noise? Thank you very much. So welcome to today's session. My name's Grace. I'm the Head of Programme of Delivery at London Funders, and I'm just going to give you a quick welcome before passing over to MPC, who you've all come to listen to, not me. So this is our third day of this year's festival. We've got over 35 sessions and over 1,000 members signed up to events, so we're really excited to have you here. This festival is really an opportunity for all of you, our members, to come together, share learning and ideas, and be inspired by others in the funding community and civil society. Our programme is packed this year, and we have 8 core themes, which are collaboration, equity, participation, place, process, systemic change, risk, and resilience. So you can filter through those on the website as well to find sessions that align with your interests. To let you know as well, this session is being recorded. That's for our internal use to help us write up the festival. If there's anything you don't want shared, please just drop myself or Shravani a message in the chat. And we're also encouraging all of our speakers and attendees to get involved on social medias as well, to share anything you want. We're on most active on LinkedIn and Blue Sky these days. But that's enough from me. I will hand you over to Alex at MPC to lead you through this event. Thank you, Alex.
Great, thank you, Grace. Hi, everybody. It's really great to be with you today and running this session. So just a brief introduction. So I'm Alex Hayes. I am Director of Transforming Funding at MPC. Been at MPC for about a year. My background is in grant making, so I was head of funding at the National Lottery Community Fund before this, and also joined by my colleague Erwin.
Hi everyone, my name is Erwin Hiltjes. I am the Director of Data and Impact at MPC, and I've got a background in the charity sector as well as the sector, and I lead most of our evaluation and data work at MPC.
Great. So the plan for today is we are going to title for the session is monitoring, evaluation, and learning with trust and equity, and we're going to kind of we'll be presenting. We'll aim to present for kind of 40 minutes or so to leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. If you have a burning question that really relates to what we're talking about, perhaps you can try and ask it at the time. We might push that question until a bit later if we think we're going to cover it. And of course, it might be difficult for us to see everything that is coming through. So hopefully, can everyone see the slides there? Hopefully, we'll just pop them up now. Yeah. There we go. So the slides there. So we'll run through. For those who don't know MPC, we are a think tank and a consultancy with a purpose. We see ourselves as our role to grow and strengthen the impact sector, and we think that we sit in that interesting space between kind of capital, whether that be funders, philanthropists, investors, and impact organisations. We do that through convening and influencing, sharing our knowledge as we go. We bring change through consultancy. We run our own collaborative projects for change as well. And the focus of today is going to be, as I say, on monitoring, evaluation, and learning with trust and equity, which handily for us, we have a publication that actually covers that, which we're going to send out at the end. We're not just going to sit here and read the publication. We're going to talk about some of the interesting stuff in there. But as someone whose name is not part of the authors, I think I can genuinely say it. And I did say this morning already. It is a genuinely brilliant report. As someone who spent time, not as an MEL specialist, I have to say, but as a grant maker, this is such a brilliant place to start to really think about how you can embed this in your organisation, how you can embed it in your grant making, and actually how you can build trust and equity within that as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the 4 sections of that. Setting your intentions, where to look, how to gather evidence, and then making the most of it. So we're going to do that, as I say, for 35 minutes or so. Let's see how we get on. and then we will move on to kind of some Q&A as that comes at the end. So hopefully that will cover everything that you guys are hoping to get through today. So we can go on. As with all of these things, we were really thinking about kind of what does an equitable and trusting approach look like, and we're really clear on some of the principles that we put into this work, and to make this a reality, we think these are really, really important, and these will have to run through everything that you're doing. Being intentional is the foundation for a trust and equitable approach. Increasing clarity and direction is going to help create transparency for grant holders, ensure that resources which are scarce are allocated where they can make the most difference, and this will enable equity to be centred to the work that you're doing. So being intentional, really focusing on why you're doing this, how this is working. As I say, I spent time as a grant maker, but beforehand, I think sometimes there is a tendency for some evaluations for learning, monitoring, just to be a bolt-on for what you're doing. And actually, it can make such a difference if it's done correctly. As it says there on the second point, MEL is more than about assessing the impact of your grants. There's so much more that you can gather from this if you want to be a really effective organisation, how you can do that going forward. Proportionality is the heart of good monitoring and evaluation practice. Again, that sits with our point around equity, but so much of what happens in the sector is not proportional, whether that be in applications, whether that be in monitoring, and it's such a key part of this. Approaches and methods must fit evidence and learning needs. So actually, how are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Making the most of evidence both for you and others. We have seen through our work, we do a lot of consultancy work, we do some really great projects with some really interesting. As funders, you sit in the incredibly privileged position on sitting on a vast amount of data and learning. And in general, the sector is not doing enough with this. How can you share this? How can you make sure that this helps the organisations that you're funding? How can you take a kind of whole asset approach as a funder? Think about all the things that you bring to the table, because one of the things you bring to the table is that evidence that you have, is that data that you have, and how can you make a difference with that? And again, how can you bring in other voices? Again, this is about centering trust and equity in this process. So how can you make sure that those other voices are shared? I want to read one thing from the report. As I say, I'm not going to sit here and read the report out loud, but I was reading it this morning again, and this really struck with me, and maybe it'll be of interest to some of you. So it says, in recent years, the funding sector has been interrogating its relationships with the organisations it supports. Many funders have sought to become more trusting, open and flexible in their grant making. Hopefully everybody is on board with all of that, offering unrestricted multi-year funding and lightening the reporting burden they place on charities. Yet, we heard when we did this, we spoke to a lot of organisations when we brought this together, reporting processes remain frustrating. Significant time is used up in practices which are perceived to be of little value both to grant holders and funders themselves. Can't see anyone here, but hopefully some of you are nodding along to that, thinking actually, how much value is this really bringing? Reading back from the report again, one answer is to strip requirements right back, remove them all there. Yet we believe evidence is the root of learning, and learning is the root of doing better. So this is about how you can do this better and how you can drive this forward as much as possible. So these were the principles that we took when we were thinking about this. How can we make these principles are at the core of what we're doing when we're thinking about this? So I'm sorry I've already spoken. I feel like I've already spoken quite a lot. I'm going to be speaking for a little bit longer as well. I'm going to run through the first two sections of the four there and then hand over to Emily to run over some of the others. So the first role is setting your intentions. And we kind of think of three specific points around that. The role of monitoring, evaluation, and learning. Think about the role of evidence within your organisation. It's really about determining the resources you'll need to invest to do this properly. Thinking about who your audiences are, what kind of data you need, what you are using it for. Key with that as well as how you're going to resource this. Funders, and quite rightly so, think about how they can spend as much money, how they can push as much money out there. How are you going to resource this properly so that you can do that? Thinking about your theory of change, which we'll come on to in a second. Thinking about your learning needs and really identifying learning questions. What are the things you're actually trying to find out when you're doing this? Within that, when you're thinking about this, think about what kind of funder you are. there's 6 kind of funder archetypes up there. And in reality, your organisation may be 2 of those, you may be 3 of those. You might be one of them for one grant programme, you might be another for another grant programme. But if you can think about the sort of funder you are, it will enable you to think about the sort of MEL that you need to do. Are you an evidence builder? Actually, are you going to invest heavily in research and evaluation and really develop a platform and a voice to share insights? About certain organisations like the Youth Endowment Fund, what works centred, they are there to create evidence, not create impact, and it completely adjusts the way that you give grants as an organisation. So are you trying to build evidence? Is it that you've seen a gap in the market? You've seen a gap that people are not understanding this area? And how can you build that evidence? Are you a capacity builder as an organisation? Are you focusing actually on strengthening organisations through additional non-grant or funded plus support? That's a different sort of evaluation, right? How are you focusing on the changes that you create within those organisations? How are you focusing on the difference? If you look at an organisation, for example, the Four, who do really interesting funding with small charities, they really focus on the change that's happened for those charities, not their impacts as well, but how are they sustainable? How have they grown? How have they changed? Are you a long-term fund? Do you fund kind of unrestricted grants over the long term? Really strong emphasis on monitoring and assessing how the individual grants are doing. And I think within that, you know, impactful grants do not develop in a linear manner. Things work in different ways. Things work in different times, in different spaces. How are you assessing that as an organisation so that you can learn and understand what works and what doesn't? Are you a systems funder? And again, you need that really deep learning approach there to really understand your role in the system. What's your space with the other people in that space, and what are you learning together? Fundraising funders, so some of you will work for funders who are endowed and don't necessarily need to think about this in the same sort of way. Others will actually be bringing in the money and be sharing it that way. So actually, who are your funders? Who are your stakeholders that you need to demonstrate your impact to? And how are you going to share that in the most effective way? Are you a large-scale funder? Kind of understand the effectiveness and the equity of your processes. Kind of look to gather and aggregate insights from across the portfolio that you have as an organisation. So I said before that I worked at National Lottery Community Fund for a number of years, and I can see this our work here in a number of spaces. You know, we were a large-scale funder, really trying to think about aggregating that data. Really challenging thing. Some of our grants are really long term, some of our grants are around capacity. What I think that, and I don't need to criticise the lottery, it is a brilliant organisation. I think we've got some people on the call as well. When I was there just a number of years ago, I'm not sure we were always as intentional as we should have. I think sometimes we thought, here's a big programme we're running, and we should do an evaluation. Why are we running an evaluation? What's our intention with that? How are we building that and designing that to make sure that we meet our intentions? So thinking about the sort of funding that you are, really, really important in there. Thinking about who your audiences are. Who are the people that you are trying to share this information with? Is it internal decision makers, your trustees, your committee members? And really thinking about what information is going to help them as much as possible. I think there is this sometimes kind of not a fear of the trustee board, but a nervousness around trustee. We must do this so that we can show to the trustees that we're making a difference. We must do this so that we can show that difference as well. Have you really spoken to them? Have you engaged with them? Do you know what data they want? Do you know how they want it to be presented? Do you know when they want to see it and what sorts of things? I found out quite different things when I was working with our committee members in different spaces. I'm a trustee of a grant giving foundation at the moment, actually. And what information is it that they need? Is it your grant holders? How do you share information back to your grant holders? You know, again, sitting on that point that you sit on vast amounts of data and what difference you make. The wider sector policy makers and practitioners. What is your ultimate goal as a funder? Is it that you're trying to create impact, or is it that you're trying to, say, create systemic change? If you are trying to create systemic change, your evaluation, your learning, your monitoring, it is not just a thing that you're doing. It's a vital part of your program, and it's the difference you can make. I often work with, for example, I led a program whilst I was at the lottery called Aging Better, which is a very large program. It was £87 million, I believe. Actually, I always felt that the the evaluation of that, which was 2.5–3% of the overall budget, I would suggest, had the ability to create more difference than the rest of that funding, because it could change systems, it could highlight things to policymakers and practitioners, it could make a massive difference. So I think really setting your attention, thinking about your audiences, what kind of data is needed and why. So again, is it that you need to just be accountable? I probably sound like I'm being negative about accountability. I'm not. I think it's important. We're a sector where money should be spent effectively. So is that what you're doing? Is it the decision making? We were having a kind of conversation in the office this morning around how much difference do evaluations make? Is it that when you've done that evaluation, when you've learned that, how does that feed back into what you're doing as an organisation? How do you take that and change that? Learn as you go. So, and is it communication purposes that you want to kind of demonstrate or grow in a different way? What kind of evidence are essential versus what's nice to have? And to what extent can evidence need to be shifted? So how is that going to change that? So thinking about what sort of data you need and why. Again, this is all part of setting your intentions. Moving on to thinking about your theory of change as a funder. We think for funders it's important to think about it in two levels. What you bring to the table as a funder, and how you fund. So thinking about, do you seek to be evidence-based? Do you seek to be equitable? Are you responsive and dynamic? Are you relational as a funder? And the role that you seek to play in the sector. Are you looking to convene people? Are you looking to be an evidence builder? Are you looking to strengthen networks and organisations? So who are you? What are the values or the qualities that you bring to your work? Is it that you really want to be a light touch and trusting organisation? So how does that balance with leaders as a funder? Is it that you're going to give long-term unrestricted grants? Again, how does that balance? Think about how you fund, the types of funding, the other assets that you deploy. We've got a session coming up soon about kind of utilising your assets as a funder. I think often as funders, we start off very much thinking in terms of our grants, which is a really important part of what you do. What are the other assets that you bring to that? What about your influence? What about your network? What about the power that you have as a funder? And how can you bring that in when you're thinking about your intentions? And the work you want to support. So who do you fund? The types of organisation, types of activity, the people or ecosystems that you want to support. How much evidence are you able to get from certain organisations? How much evidence is it appropriate to get from certain organisations? Do you need to fund that? Are you funding that enough? Those sorts of things. And then think about what you want to achieve. So the short-term, the long-term changes you hope to see, either for the organisations you fund, the wider field, the people, the communities, the ecosystems you support. So again, really being intentional at the beginning of the process and thinking about what you bring to that space. Thinking about what you want to learn. And I think thinking about that in kind of two spaces, whether that be the kind of thematic questions. So what are the wider factors influencing change in this area? How do we know, I'm missing a word there, what is most effective in supporting our communities? So thinking about thematic questions, what are the specific things that you want to learn within that? I ran a program with a lottery called Healthy Communities Together. That was a partnership between ourselves and the King's Fund, looking to bring together local voluntary sector organisations, local health organisations and local authorities to think about how they could build equitable partnerships, ultimately to reduce health inequalities. And actually, evaluation wasn't the right point for us. It was very much focused on our learning questions. What were the really specific things we were hoping to learn through that program? We were really looking at, actually, how do you build a partnership? What are the nuts and bolts of a partnership? How does that work in different spaces at different times and sorts of things? Again, taking an equity lens to that, how are different groups affected by the issues that you're trying to address, and therefore how might that affect your approach to this? Organisations, how are organisations experiencing your report? Like, are you really kind of asking those sorts of questions? Are you going out and finding out how organisations feel about you as a funder? Are you going out and finding out what you could change in your processes, what you can do differently at different times? Are you identifying and selecting the right organisations? Again, thinking about your data, thinking about who are the communities who are most affected by these issues, and actually, are you looking at those? Be that geographical, be that kind of different sorts of protected characteristics that communities might have. Really understanding is your going to the group's experiencing the most disadvantage in this space. So I think really taking time to think about what you're trying to learn, and we'll come on to this a bit later, but kind of how do you build that into your process? Once you're thinking about those questions, how does that affect what you're doing? How does that change what you're doing as a result? So that's the kind of first point that we kind of run through there, like setting your intentions and really being clear about why that is, and taking the equity lens within that. And then thinking about where to look within that. Thinking about your grants, focusing on the whole organisation, its impact, how it understands what it's achieving, what it's learning. Really, we do a lot of this with our philanthropy clients, really thinking about what is the data that you're getting from those organisations? What is it that you've asked from them? How are you going to kind of understand that as a result? Turning the lens, so looking inwards, really that's going to be the key to creating better grant making practices. So think about this in a holistic way. Think about the different kinds of data and perspective that you can draw on and what you can control in that place. So really assessing your own practice, gathering a range of evidence and perspective, people you fund, people you don't fund, your peers, organisations in that space, and thinking about kind of what data they can tell you there. And then looking outwards, drawing on external evidence to understand the issues, what's effective, the wider landscape, and your role within it. I think as a fund, there's a couple of things I would say there. One is we're going to be publishing something relatively soon, which we did for one of our philanthropy clients, which they run a portfolio around disadvantaged young people in the UK. We support them with their grant making on that. And, they asked us to really think about, go out there, look outwards, look on the external evidence and find out what are the issues affecting young people. And actually, we looked at external evidence, we spoke to other funders, we spoke to their grantees, tried to make it as much of a light touch process as possible for those grantees. And what did we learn? And one of the things we're trying to do at MPC is we're trying to be much more open and sharing what we do, which we would argue you guys should do as well. And we're going to publish this relatively soon. But actually, there were new things that were coming out. And one of the things that really struck me around this at the time was that there is a really rising problem at the moment with young people's attendance at school. We think it's possibly a post-COVID thing. The levels of young people who are not going to school or not regularly going to school is rising. That is a challenge. We have found that, we've looked at the evidence, we understand that's an issue. What do we do now as a result? So we then drew that back into their strategy as an organisation to think about how that affects their portfolio. Is it that they now need to go and seek different organisations that they can support? Is it that they're going to think about that in different ways? And then we're going to share that as well. So I think, thinking about your grants, thinking about yourselves as an organisation, and thinking about the wider landscape that you might have as well. And I think I've probably jumped ahead with these two slides anyway. I've talked about it already, but kind of thinking, where your grants go. And there's some specific examples of things you might want to look at there. The DEI data standard, which I believe is with the Association of Charitable Foundations on their website. I think that's a link as well, so you can have a look at that when you get the slides. Thinking about how equitably your funds being distributed. Thinking about the geographical spread of your grant. Some of you may be place-based, but you can still think about the geographical spread within that. Categorising grants. For example, using the index of multiple deprivation. One of the things I found on the Healthy Communities Together programme I talked about was that we knew going into this that health inequalities were greatest in the northeast, for example. We received 170 applications in the first phase. We only received 15 from the northeast. We categorised the country in 6 ways. So I think we received about 80 from London and the southeast. So that was a real challenge for us as an organisation. We wanted to make a difference that ultimately was trying to reduce health inequalities, and we were struggling to fund organisations that were in that space and how they were, probably the most important place for us to get our money. So we looked at a second round of funding. How could we actually increase the amount of funding and fund organisations who were at a different point of their journey in a slightly different way to do that? And then thinking about talking to our teams who are based in the northeast, what can we do actually? Why are we not getting the applications? How can we drive that going forward? Talking to my colleagues at the King's Fund, can we go to the northeast? Can we start sharing our learning openly as we go? How are we going to drive that as we're going forward? So, really thinking about where your grants are going, How well your process is working, internal data grantee surveys, an independent review to, there's an example there for the foundation practice rating, which is something that is set up and funded by the Friends of Provident Foundation. You can opt in to be reviewed, and they look at you in relation to 4 areas, including diversity, accountability, and transparency. They give you a score between A and D, I think, on all of them, and they produce them. They also pick on a number of funders every year who have not opted in, so you may be assessed anyway. But actually having a look at that and thinking about, I was actually speaking to a funder on Tuesday night who had not realised they had not opted in and they were assessed. But what they said was actually it was really useful, and there were areas that they realised that they weren't achieving as much as they could. Actually, what does that mean for you as a funder, and how are you going to change your practice and move forward? Thinking about how effective your support is. Again, with the Funder Plus activities, and I've commissioned and run a lot of Funder Plus activities, are people engaging with the support? Are they actually coming onto the sessions? Are they taking up different parts of the support? What is it that seems to be the most important thing for them, and how might you kind of make sure that you do as much of that as you possibly can? Again, I've already talked around this, so looking outwards, taking a desk review, learning from people with lived experience, professionals, practitioners, academics. System mapping to find levers for change. I think this is really, really important. Again, thinking about your space in the kind of, particularly like the word, but I'm going to use it anyway, the kind of ecosystem that you have. What's the bit that you operate within that? I've talked about my experience of around health inequality. Health inequality is a huge issue and an intractable issue that organisations like the NHS, which has a much bigger budget, is not really moving the dial on. So what was important to me was to understand how that system fits together and what are the levers for change. We can't affect everything, but we could do this. We could support organisations to do these bits. So how do you bring that together? Understanding what's effective. There's a lot of evidence out there. I mean, that's the other thing I would say is that, really is the best way for you to get evidence as an organisation to ask your grantees, who may well be very small charities, to give you that level of data. Are they equipped? Do they have the level of expertise? Do they have the time and space to be able to do that properly? Or is that data actually already out there? We've got our own data labs, which you can find on our website. And there's a whole range of work centres that will have this out there as well. I'm talking to different stakeholders as well. Again, understanding your role within that system. And there's lots of brilliant networks out there. The Association of Charitable Foundation, the ACF has their Funders Collaborative Hub. I really would recommend everyone to have a look at that. There's over 100 opportunities, I believe, that are live there. Some you can join, some that are emerging, some you can put out there yourself as well. So have a look at what's out there. And again, system mapping to understand who else is engaging in that sector and who might you want to kind of engage with as a result. So really thinking about really using monitoring, evaluation, and learning as appropriate resource. Now I'll hand over to her.
Thank you. So we now talked about setting the intentions and where to look, and we'll move on now to the second part of the presentation, which is more about once you've decided those intentions and you've looked at the different areas that you can look in order to do your monitoring, evaluation, and learning. It's about how to gather that evidence and then making the most of it. Now, we believe at MPC that evaluation and learning has immense power to change the sector, immense power to increase impact, to create better lives for people. But it's really important that here, as a group of funders, you are often in a power disbalance with your grantees. And in the evaluation and learning space, you often hold more power than them, being really aware of that. And therefore, it's really important to be intentional, to look not just at the grants, but also at yourself. And also in how we get our evidence, it's so important that what we do is proportional. Now, it's centered to the equity and the trusting approach that most funders now want, but also that we see based on the feedback from charities that is so crucial, that relationship, that power balance between funders and charities, that becomes more trusting and equitable. So how can you be proportional? So it must be proportional for everyone, and not just for you as funder. It must be proportionate for everyone. But you as funder, you have a say in it, of course, as well. So proportionality, we look at three different things: funders, the grants, and the grant holders. So for you as funder, you need to ask yourself, what is the stake? How important is this for us? That, amongst others, determines how much you want to monitor it for accountability purposes, etc., or how much you want to learn about this because it's so at the core of what you do. But also, what's your own capacity and resources? If you are a funder with limited capacity and resources, then you're not going to look at all the data that you collect, and you don't have that capacity to do things with it. Then also, there's no point for yourself in asking for all that data. So you as a funder play an important role in proportionality. But it's also your grants. So what is the grant size of it? What is the value and the length? If it's a 1-year grant, don't ask for impact measurement on systems change. And if it's smaller grants, relatively for organization, you can't maybe expect them to fill in a completely new evaluation format if they've got multiple of these smaller grants. And you really need to think about how proportionate is our evaluation and learning requests based on the grant size. Lastly, and very important for the equitable and trusting approaches, is of course listening to the voice of your grant holders. So we always advise to have a conversation and involve grant holders in the design of your evaluation and learning approach. Now, you have to look at and listen to them, ask them about their size, and also which sector they're in and the type of organization that they are. You can imagine if you're working with really small grassroots charities who are maybe not familiar with evaluation and learning, you will have a very different evaluation and learning approach that is proportional for them than if you're working with a large charity who has a dedicated team for evaluation and learning. So thinking about the type of grant holder you have is really important for proportionality. Now, what does it mean in practice? So, got a few examples here on the slide. So, it really means that requirements should vary where there are significant differences. It can't be a one-size-fits-all approach. And a lot of people on the call feel like, oh, I'm an expert on this, I know how to do this. And we think expertise is very important and experience is very important. You need to be able to vary requirements based on these different dimensions. Now, if there's really a lot at stake for you, you also have a responsibility to make sure that you are making informed decisions and you are getting enough data. So that is a really valid point to make sure that you articulate that and make that known and understood. Now, grant holders' voice are super important in understanding what is proportionate and preferred. And sometimes it can actually be really surprising. Very often we have conversations with funders who say, I want to do funder class, and we're going to do these learning programs. And actually, when you talk to grant holders, they say, I really appreciate that you want to do this for us, but I don't have time, and I would rather spend my money or time on something else. I hope you're okay with that. And I think that conversation and having that trusting relationship with your grantees so they can tell you that is really, really important. Now, flexibility and openness, some funders then go say, well, we'll see, and you can just report whatever you want, which can actually lead to more work and also an uneven playing field for organizations when the requirements are very, very open. So make sure that if you go that way, provide enough examples of what you're sort of after and what good enough or good looks like, so that you do give them those boundaries. And lastly, make sure that you're clear about why you're collecting the evidence. So it goes back to the points that Alex was talking about your intentions and what you want to learn, and always explain about sort of what is it being used for, because you really can show that proportionality. Now, how do you now select your approach to evaluation? Very often, we see funders who go like, well, let's do an evaluation because that is what we want and we need to evaluate. But actually, there's many, many different ways of monitoring, evaluating, learning, and it's important to consider what is the right type of approach for the project, the organizations, and the grants that you're working with. And that really helps to create that trust and equity as well. So don't just go for your default approach of a learning partnership or an evaluation just because you're used to it. So we provide two axes here. One is the level of alignment between grant holders. So on the one hand, you can have really diverse aims and approaches with your grant holders, or you can have quite aligned aims and approaches. And that is something that's really important to consider. The other axis is sort of the nature of the work that you're trying to support, which can be sort of tried and tested, or you're doing really new and innovative experimental projects. You're funding innovative projects. So if something is quite tried and tested already, there is less of a need to do a full sort of evaluation. And you can often sort of have really appropriate and proportionate monitoring, just reporting and monitoring if there are diverse approaches, and you can ask grantees just to share with you their objectives, because you don't necessarily need to have a look at their activities too much. Now, if you are funding new things, then it makes more sense to have either grant evaluation if there's lots of different grants with diverse aims, or if there is a lot of alignment, it can be more of a learning partnership or a fund evaluation or a shared measurement. Now, which one is appropriate for you in your situation? It really depends on the situation. And I think it depends, and don't decide it by yourself is very important. So have a chat, make sure that you discuss it as well with grant holders or potential grant holders, and really are intentional about choosing the right approach given where you are as a funder and the type of grants that you give and what you try to do. So this builds on chapter 1 and 2 of the report as well. Now, what are different types of evidence sources? It's good, I won't spend too much time on this, but it's good to remember that there's more than just an evaluation form or a reporting form, right? You can, of course, ask for written reports, but you can also ask for existing evidence already or publicly available information to learn from. There's survey data, you can ask for raw data. It depends on who you are and what your own capacity is. But also very often there are checking calls or visits to charities just to monitor. And those can be really appropriate, but sometimes can also be quite burdensome. So sometimes it's better to have group conversations or learning events, which are more efficient or are less extractive and more useful to the group as well. Now, when you're trying to pick the right ones, make sure that you really think about what are the methods that I'm looking for, what am I aiming to do, and then pick the right methods that match that. So make sure that you think about or intentional about it. Now, asking for lots of data, and it's okay if you then also do something with it. So one very important point in making is that number 4, our last chapter, is about making the most of it. So you have a responsibility as a funder if you ask and you ask all this monitoring, evaluation, and learning data to actually make sure that it turns into learning, and to then make the most of it. Make the most of it for your grantees, make the most of it for yourself, and make the most of it for the wider sector. So we'll walk through a few examples of how you could make the most. So first one is invest in analysis. So make sure that you have that time and that you think about who is doing the analysis and what lens do they have, what experience do they bring? Because sometimes somebody from a marginalized group might look at certain data very differently than somebody who's really privileged. So make sure that you have also the diversity in your analysis team, and also think about how to collect the data, how to analyze it, so that you can analyze it, how to store it, so you can analyze it. Now, here's an example of the Ellen MacArthur Cancer Trust, who have done this really wonderful data dashboard and to report back outwards as well of what their impact is based on some of their questionnaires and well-being measures with young people of how pre, post, and follow-up survey well-being has gone up. And you can see also they're really completely transparent and sharing back about what the insights are, what it's based on, and how results how the results differ at different moments. They have a whole filter, and you can look at different categories. It's very important when we're doing analysis to also appreciate that there are these different ways to slice the data, and especially for the equitable approach, it's important to have a look and make sure that you do look at those nuances of the different groups that are hidden within the data. We also do lots of dashboard programs at MPC, dashboards projects at MPC, so we can also support that if you are interested in something like that. Now, secondly, on making the most of it, make sure that you create spaces for learning and reflection, and that is having the time for it, the resources for yourself to reflect what does the data tell us and what does that mean. I always like the so what and the so what now. Like, what does it tell us, but also what action does it inform? And we always advise to build in a fixed rhythm, because otherwise it sort of gets lost. There's different methods to sort of create also space for reflexivity and creativity. And one of the tools that we also have on our website in our system change toolkit, practice toolkit, is this tool for the triple learning loop tool, triple learning loop tool, which helps you think about those different questions to ask. So the single loop learning would be, are we doing it right? Are we right? The second one would be, are we doing the right things? And then the third sort of group of questions to ask is like, how do we know what's right? And sort of think about paradigms and assumptions behind what you are doing. Each of these questions are valid at some point, and it's important to create spaces for all of those. You can do that by yourself, or you can do it with your grantees. The worst of the worst is if you collect lots of data and all these insights, you commission evaluations, and it goes into a drawer, and everyone feels it's a waste of time. So this is such an important step to make sure that you are. Now, finally, it is important also to be accountable. Accountability is part of our sector, and it is very important. So as part of that accountability, it's not just that report that goes into a drawer. It's about being transparent. It's about sharing. It's about being open about things. Now, here's an example about the of the Headwaters Foundation. They created a learning book, and what is really great is that they publish all their data in there, their analysis, and they link it back to their theory of change and their values, their intentions. So what they do is they really close that loop between setting their intentions, deciding where to look, and then choosing the right analysis and the approach, and then making the most of it. And this evaluation and data learning book is a fantastic way, an example of how it all comes together, and they publish it and are accountable for it and share those learnings with others. So they link all their data and insights to their values, as well as for different of their aims, such as increased capacity and leadership for system change. They bring the different data points from what they're learning. And beautiful long-term indicators. Now, we will share this presentation and reports so you can have a look at those links as well. So we hope to have inspired you today a little bit, and we still have some time for questions. And I think what we hope is that the report also sparks organizations to not lose faith in evaluation and learning, but there is a really good way to do it with trust and equity, but it does also require to think about what your role is, how you work, what your approach is, and how to do evaluation and learning in a very transparent and intentional way together with your grant holders.
So yeah, we've got time for I think about 15 minutes, something like that. So I think we can take questions in the chat, or I don't know if there's an option to ask questions. There is. Should we take slides down?
I'll take the
So
slides
we'll
down.
take them down, and then yeah, if anyone's got any kind of thoughts on particular questions that you might have, or things that really resonated with you, or examples, we've got 15 minutes, so we're really happy to kind of be led by what's the most useful thing for people who are here.
Any questions? Trying to get the faces on the screen.
I'm going to share another thought then while people are thinking about questions or writing something in the chat or popping their hand up. That perhaps we didn't talk about as much, which was kind of like building trust around this. And I was reflecting on this when I was thinking about doing this presentation yesterday. I distinctly remember used to spend a lot of time trying to build trust with grantees. We had long-term grantees who we gave kind of relatively significant amounts to. And it was really important that we kind of test and learn programs and they felt really comfortable with us and we could work to appropriately. I distinctly remember saying to one of my grantees who was doing their annual monitoring report that I just wanted 2 pages. I didn't want a lot of information from them. I wanted kind of 3 questions: what's gone well, what's not gone well, what are you learning as a result, and that I wanted to have it in a much more conversational way, and I didn't really want to burden them. And would say to them a lot that the only person I could guarantee would read their annual report that they would send me was me, and I would always read it, and I would try and share it with other people, but actually it was very rare that people would read it. And I distinctly remember one of my grantees sending me a 20-page report at the end of this, because that's what they were comfortable doing and they wanted to share everything they've done. And it just reflects on me kind of how challenging that approach is to really make sure that you have built that trust, that people really feel comfortable when you're saying, we want to do something different, we want to do it in a different way. I saw a funder the other day who was, accepting things via voice note. Now, personally, I hate voice notes, so I wouldn't go with that. But there are different ways that you can gather this sort of information. You have to build the relationship with your grantees. We have built a system where grantees feel very comfortable doing things in a certain way. And if you want to do things in a kind of more trusting and equitable way, you've got to spend the time to do it that way. So we've had a question come through from Louise. Thank you, Louise. Any tips for tackling the aggregation piece, especially where trustees, etc., are keen to understand the impact of an overall portfolio of grants? It's a really challenging piece, and again, I would go back to the beginning of like setting your intentions, like actually bringing them into that process and understanding kind of what is the thing they really want to engage with, what's the thing they really want to understand, and what does that look like, and how much does your portfolio of grants enable you to do that properly, right? Is it that you're going to end up? We support a number of foundations at the moment, and a trustee actually said something to me about this recently. Can we just bring all together? And you kind of like, you are comparing apples and pears. There are some people who do very light touch interventions with a large number of people, and there are some people who do very in-depth interventions with a small number of people. And how do you aggregate those two things together? You can't. So thinking about what are the data points that you would do to do that. The lottery released, sorry to always use the lottery as my most recent experience, released their first impact report 2, 3, 4 years ago, something like that. The lottery has, a grant from £200 to £50 million. It's a really hard thing to aggregate. And you look at some of the bits of data they had there was around the number of volunteer positions they supported, the number of actual jobs they supported in the sector, those sorts of things. And again, who the stakeholders for that are, it's proving the value to government, so they could do that as well.
Yeah, just to add that, I think in chapter 3 as well, it talks about selecting your approach, and we have that axis between, are your grants very diverse, or are they grantees all quite aligned in their aims and their approach? I think the more aligned they are, the more you could say, okay, we could do a piece where we try to aggregate it. And I think bringing your trustees along on the journey, on explaining like why you're doing certain things and why it is possible, why it isn't, is important. And I think one of the things is, if they ask for it, it's not just a click of the button, and you're not just asking everyone to fill in the same form and then you aggregate it. But yes, these have aligned aims and these have aligned sort of approaches and activities. So we can do an aggregative piece. Now let's discuss what would be the right way to go about this. Is it shared measurement that we try to develop with this group of grantees? but it needs to be informed by what they want to measure and how they want to reach their goals. It should be helpful for them. Or is it that we commission a fund evaluation and we say, well, for as a grantee, we want ask an evaluator to look across the different grants that we give. Or is it more of a learning partnership? And if the grants are all quite aligned, why don't we create like the Festival of Learning this week? We create a day of learning, and we invite all of our grantees, and we pay them for it, for their time, and we invite them to network and learn, and we have a speaker, and that will be a moment in which we will be able to gather and aggregate some things because of the things that we do on that learning day. So having that, it's sometimes it's possible, but then have that conversation with the trustee, like, okay, if this is really important to you, and this is what it takes to do it well and to do it equitable and to do it in a good way together with our portfolio, is that what you want, or is that too much to ask? In which case, maybe you can't do what you ask at this moment.
A question from Lily, I think.
Oh yeah, hi, thank you. Sorry, I'm no video because my internet's struggling a bit, but that was really interesting. Thank you. Yeah, it's kind of I think it's a question, it's a thought. It's sort of thinking about like theories of change and like so that like the theory of change has been around for like a while, and like you feel like it's something you should have, and I guess I'm just thinking like, is there a radical approach to that, or like how do you ensure as a funder that you're not still kind of centering like what you want to know, what you're hoping to learn? How do we kind of move towards some kind of theory of change or some kind of measure or evaluation where it's it's not just centering your needs as a funder, I suppose. Yeah.
A couple of things I think initially is a theory of change may be the right sort of thing for you. There may be different, we talked a little bit about learning questions before. So I think, what are the most important things to do? And how do you do that in the open and with other people? How do you engage people so that we can do this together? I think is what I would say is actually engage your grantees, engage the wider sector. Actually, we are going to put, I talked about young people, perhaps there's a problem around school attendance at the moment. We're going to put £5 million into a number of organisations who are going to do stuff around school attendance. Like, what do the DFE think that they would like to find out about it? What do other charities think they'd like to find out? What do parents care about? What do schools care about? Like, how do we build that and be realistic and proportionate within that to understand kind of how you can do that appropriately, I suppose. So I think it's about doing it openly and doing it in the open. Our colleague Tris would love this because he really wants to do open theories of change across sectors and all that sort of stuff. But if you look on our website, there's some really interesting resources around open philanthropy, and they might be worth having a quick read of. But how can you engage those different voices to find out about what's really important for them?
Yeah. And if I can add, we have a publication, Theory of Change in 10 Steps, which is really well read. It's a certain approach to do things, but it's not the only way. So the theory of change that we presented today is actually more funder focused and sort of like, what do you bring to the table and what sort of the characteristics of the work that you support. And so it's not about, a theory of change in one certain way. It's about, okay, it's important that we set out those intentions, that we think about what we're trying to achieve so that it helps us think through how we give and also how we evaluate how we give. So don't be dogmatic and think we have to do it in one way because that's how we used to do it. Have that flexibility. And two, invite people in to join you. It can be through open approaches, but you can also say, let's pay lived experience people to come in and do the workshops with us. In the past, we've worked with partners in learning with lived experience that we paid that came to our learning events who are not from the grantees, but from the communities, and were able to do the analysis together with us so we wouldn't have biases. We had sounding boards and reference groups of grantees to join in workshops to create those theories of change. And I think that inclusive approach of not doing it from your ivory tower, but doing it with the communities that you really try to serve is really important.
And I think we've got 5 minutes left. I know we're going to hand over to Grace for some kind of final thoughts in a moment, but another question from Deirdre. Deirdre?
Thank you. Yeah, Deirdre. I'll try and be quick. I think it relates a little bit to your last answer, which is really helpful. I think what I'm thinking about is, are there like dangers and risks of like doing one before the other? So I build a really open, trusting relationship with my grantee and they share really openly with me. but meanwhile my trustees or my decision makers are at a different point, and kind of how actually that could, the damage that could cause if someone could share really openly about some failures they've had, and we probably have all of this experience, things get pulled out of context and they don't get funded, or that lands with the wrong person at the wrong time. And just something about kind of creating a learning culture. We talk about an organization, but actually it's an organization with then these other people that tend to sit a little bit separately. And just any thoughts you have on that?
I think it's a really good point, and I'm not sure I have a clear answer for it, because I think it's a challenge, right? Like, I don't think that's an easy thing to do. I think that it kind of comes down to your values, right, as an organisation, and how you build that into who you are as an organisation and what that means, and how you get buy-in across the organisation that says that you're going to do that. If you are going to, the programs I worked on previously, we did long-term funding, we did test and learn funding, and we spent a lot of time building relationships with people. But that did mean they could come to you and say it hasn't worked. You gave us a lot of money to do this over 7 years. 2 years in, it's really not working for X, Y, Z reason, and it's working together with them to do it. But we also had to make sure that we were selling that internally, so that our committee members, our directors, our other people in the organisation understood that we really want that information to come in, and therefore we value it and we work with people appropriately. So I think it comes to your values, and therefore you have to kind of permeate what you do as an organisation.
Yeah. And I would just like to add very, very briefly, I really like the phrase turning the lens. And I think doing that and saying we also need to look at our own practice will help you have conversations with trustees and say it's really important that we listen to how we're perceived and how our grantees think of us, and we need to look at our own practice. And that's a very good first way to start having a conversation with your trustees around what are the behaviors that we show as an organization that may be good or bad for trying to create the change that we want to see. Very, very often the wanting to have uniform data or being scared of failure is something that you can have a great conversation about when you talk about turning the lens. What is our practice and how do we influence the ultimate impact in the end? Evaluation is not just about your grants. Evaluation is also about turning that lens towards you in order for it to be actable. I think we're running out of time.
I think so, and I think we'll hand over to Grace. I think you want to say.
Yeah, just say the report will be shared, the slides will be shared, and we're always very happy to chat on this further. So you will see our details as well on reporting. Please do contact us if you want to have a further chat.
Thank you so much, Owen and Alex. That was really informative. And yeah, we will share the slides and the report back out with everyone. Thank you so much for attending. We've got a plethora of more sessions, so do pop over to the festival website. And we also have an in-person festival finale next Thursday, so it'd be great to see if any of you can be there. But that's all from us, and just a huge thanks to our speakers and for all of you attending, and hopefully see you at another event soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.